Those are striking terms.
All right, thanks for joining me. Today is December the 30th, 2018. We're right at the end of the year. 2019, will it be the year that the world stops spinning or doesn't? This is the year that the question is raised to enough people, critical mass, in fact, that there has to be a conclusion, one way or the other. We can't really go that much further down the road like this with this cognitive dissonance. You have the true believers being shuffled off to Mars, and then you have the non believers, the perceivers, who are being increasingly marginalized and pointed out as being anti science or denialist. Now, denialist is one of those words you want to watch. Denialist is something of a misnomer. It's like, are you really a non believer? Just because you're not a believer, does that make you a non believer? I would say no. I would say you have believers and perceivers. And they don't like perceivers. When I say they, I mean the world view reinforces in your government entertainment media complex. They want believers and followers. And so when you see for yourself and you think for yourself, you eliminate the need for them, for mediation, for their mediated version of reality. And that's what it is. It's a version. And you're under no obligation to believe what you're told to believe by the news. And just because you don't, doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're ignorant. In fact, it's the opposite. The idea that flat Earth represents some kind of archaic mode of thought is a myth. It wasn't some anti-science line of thinking that was opposed and eventually defeated, and then the flat earthers were pushed back into the dark ages. Never happened. In fact, the spinning ball model, which is a model based on belief and faith, is a product of dark age thinking. Non-belief and perception is what you would consider to be scientific. It's based on what you can perceive, what you can measure, what's repeatable. So here we are questioning very basic things. And of course, we're dealing with a society where people have been trained to outgroup the non-believer. So we also have to deal with the fact that we're surrounded by fundamentalists of this MSM worldview. First thing I wanted to discuss today was this. FCC fined Swarm Technologies $900,000 for unauthorized small-sat launch. Do you remember after Starman, which was almost a year ago, we're almost at our first hoax anniversary for Starman, the fake event where they pretended to launch a Tesla Roadster into space. Well, after that, the FCC invoked a 26-year-old law on the books that had never been enforced, which says if you go to outer space, you can't broadcast the Earth live without prior approval, without a permit. They didn't have a permit, so they were broadcasting the Earth without a permit. And I thought, what's the point of that? Because after he launched it, it seemed like he was pretty confident that this would end the debate. Take that, flat earthers, right? Of course, it didn't end the debate. The Starman is a huge thorn in their side. It did quite the opposite. If anything, it gave us a lot more to go off of. So, Starman, as you know, broadcasted the Earth without approval, and that's just a way of saying, hey, if we try to do it, let's say Mike goes up there, how high can he go and broadcast before he risks getting fined? Not that we care. I'm not really worried about fines for that kind of thing, but this is just showing you here that they're regulating space. Space Force is there to militarize, but they're already regulating it. And nothing was launched up there. Okay, space is a hoax. There is nothing orbiting. So Swarm Technology sent these Space B Pico satellites. They wanted a constellation of 100 tiny satellites. So not only have these not been launched, but there are no such thing as orbiting satellites, but this is just setting the stage. That space is an area that's regulated, and if you do space without permission, you can be fined. They said, FCC investigating Swarm, they said The company had performed activities that required FCC authorization. They conducted communication tests with weather balloons and ground stations, along with other unapproved tests of satellite equipment. Unapproved. You remember the BLM tried to stop Mike from launching a steam powered rocket 2,000 feet up? And really, when you look at the space program, what we call the space program, it's really just there to monopolize exploration, vertical exploration. Ronald Reagan, while he was in office, had put up something like 17 different regulatory bodies between you and the possibility of being a space entrepreneur. Check this out. This is, again, we're looking at Swarm, and the $900,000 fine for launching these little cubes into space. Well, what they say is space. Let's listen to this. This is, of course, space.com.
And others to design spacecraft, fly a mission, and collect real data. But flying to space along with other payloads was like flying coach class to space, and it placed limitations on where CubeSats could go in orbit.
So by flying piggyback or as secondaries basically meant that we had to go where the primary went. We were not able to select our orbits. We had to build our science around those particular orbits or sacrifice some of the science.
So they got tired of piggybacking with what was already going up there, and so they did it on their own, and they got hit with fines. And look how fake that looks. Look, no matter how many of these things they send up, they're not sending us more realistic pictures of the Earth. This looks like a video game. But they know that they have an entire generation of people who are believers in this because they've been immersed in it with entertainment and video games and news, where they really can't differentiate or see no difference.
Science.
That's what the Venture Class Launch Services was developed to fix. In short, it's a small satellite game changer. Fast forward 3 years. In this business, that's a blink of an eye, especially if you're going from a rocket on paper to a rocket that's ready to fly with CubeSats as the primary payload. Now, CubeSats are the primary payload. In other words, they're going to be flying first class. Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit are on the leading edge of this new era in small satellite capability. Rocket Lab's two-stage Electron rocket stands nearly 56 feet tall. Its Rutherford engine is the first oxygen kerosene engine to have all its primary components created by 3D printing in just 24 hours. Pre-launch processing takes place at the company's location in Huntington Beach.
3D printed rockets ready to go in 24 hours. Pretty quick. They're accelerating this thing. They really are. So all the investors in these companies, the people buying CubeSats, the people going to school for this, the people studying this stuff, they are all true believers in the system, and their standard of evidence is video. And I've been saying lately that when we're talking about MSM fundamentalist worldview, a worldview shaped by pseudo-news and pseudoscience, they do make arguments from video. Video is evidence in this worldview. Just like if your worldview is that of a Islamist, well, your Quranic verses, that counts as evidence. If you're a biblical literalist, your scripture is evidence. Well, video is the scripture in the NWO religion of outer space.
Beach, California. Then it's all shipped to New Zealand. Launch Complex 1 is located an 8-hour drive from Auckland on the remote Mahia Peninsula.
It's testament to NASA's vision for the future to invest in something this early, and it's really fantastic. What Rocket Lab is about is enabling small satellites to do really important things that affect us all.
Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 is a 2-stage rocket.
Now that looks like a damn blimp. I mean, I don't really even speculate so much because most of it's just CGI, but if you had to ask me, they're basically launching cylindrical blimps out of sight and then switching the feed to CGI. That's what they're doing. And the rockets go into a tilt out of necessity. They cannot go straight up perpendicular. They would fall back down. So they arc into orbit. That's why you see them arc from the ground. And I like to point that out because from the space station, every time we see a rocket come up, like the Progress rocket back in November, They did a time lapse of it, and there was no gravity tilt. It didn't arc into orbit. It went perpendicular from the ball straight up into space. No arc. Like, they messed up big. And again, it's cognitive dissonance off the scale that you can have video of the rocket arcing from the ground, but from space it goes straight up. I mean, that's a major continuity error. And we're not going to let them get away with it. If I had to put a list of things that I think will bring the space station down in the minds of the believers, it's stuff like that. It's continuity errors with the space station where they can't correct it. They cannot go back and correct that. They cannot say, well, this time it went straight up. No, it didn't. It did not. And by the way, in addition to now making it easier for people to get CubeSats into space and making space more accessible, they dropped it down to 50 miles. It used to be 62. Seems somewhat arbitrary. I think the reason for lowering space, of course, is regulation. As humanity becomes increasingly liberated from constraints, we become increasingly technologically sophisticated, it becomes more and more likely that people are going to start exploration, so they're going to have to lower it down a bit. You go about 50 miles, who knows what you might see.
About 70 feet in length and weighing in around 57,000 pounds at takeoff. Rocket and payload are processed at the company's facility in Long Beach, California. Finally, Launcher 1 is air-launched from Cosmic Girl, the company's 747 carrier aircraft, providing the flexibility to launch from locations around the world.
Really appreciate the effort that's gone in for this new innovative program that's not only going to unleash.
Again, I'm looking at this because what we're seeing here is also how private space entrepreneurs are going to be taking over the headlines, and there's less scrutiny there. Their claims are pretty much impossible to challenge, which is why I want to revisit Saturn X. So Saturn X started off as, you could say, satire, I guess. We were thinking, well, what if we lose? What happens if the believers defeat the perceivers and fake trumps real, and people start moving to their Mars bases and their lunar bases? If that happens, what's going to happen to the tolerance that they have for the non-believers? Will it be safe to not believe in space travel in 5 years? Will they make the case that denialism is a hate crime? Well, they already said it's hate speech and it's grounds for censorship, and that's according to Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. Denialism. Well, denialism of what? Well, it's not just Holocaust denialism or Sandy Hook denialism, but both of those will get you banned. Climate change denialism is something else that I'm constantly seeing pitched as a threat to the survival of mankind. Makes you a threat to your neighbors. You're going to incur the wrath of globe, and it's going to strike you down and hit everybody around you. So it's irresponsible, as the Flat Earth Society, government-controlled Flat Earth Society, said, it would be irresponsible to doubt the science of climate change. So our backup plan was, well, if we're not able to make any headway, if logic and reason and actual science fails to break this matrix, then what? So I thought, well, why don't those of us in the know go to Saturn? We know it's a ruse, so let's just play along. And so I was looking into space entrepreneurship. To be an entrepreneur that goes to outer space and settles on the rings of Saturn, for example. So we were thinking, let's just create a plan for traveling to Saturn, or anywhere really, mining asteroids, and just see what happens. Because it's all going private, and I would like to see what kind of limitations there are, and whether or not it's all entirely a farce. Is there any real true space entrepreneur out there that isn't completely controlled by the government? And the answer is no. So we were looking into space junk reclamation as a part of Saturn X's program, and what we ran into was regulation. Apparently you can't just go clean up the skies, even though we've been told that the skies might fall as a result. Space junk is dangerous. We might be locked down for centuries if the space junk goes out of control into the Kessler effect, which is essentially an avalanche up there. If that happens, we're screwed for 100 years. So I was thinking, well, let's send a trash compactor that uses electromagnetics to pull junk out of orbit. We compact it, pack it into a big ball, and send it to the moon, and send a bill to Jeff Bezos. Well, the Russians, whoever's going to colonize the moon first. Well, I called a place that tracks a DARPA installation out in White Sands, New Mexico. I called them up and I said, hey, I'd like to get into this space junk reclamation, and I know that you keep track of 30-some thousand pieces real time of this debris, micrometeors, etc. How do we get into it? How do we launch our trash compacting CubeSats up there? And they said, you don't. We would need, there are so many regulatory hurdles and hoops that, yeah, as private citizens, we're not going to be able to, because if I were to go up there and pick up a piece of space junk and it belongs to China, it could create an international incident. So space junk reclamation is a very sensitive thing. But the idea here with Saturn, of course, was also recognizing what the space program actually is. Okay, so we all know what it is. We all know that the space program is a cover for a transition into a new age, which Agenda 2030 spells it out, neo-feudalism. So if that's where the space program is going, if Mars is just slavery, I thought, well, let's have an alternative. And Saturn 2060 can be that alternative. Why settle for farming potatoes on Mars when you could conceivably have a life of luxury up there on Saturn? And our thinking, of course, was, let's just do the opposite. If that's about direct democracy and slavery and sustainability and going green, let's just create a world of excess, casinos on the rings of Saturn. And as ridiculous as that may sound, it's no more and no less ridiculous than any of the claims made by your space program. And it's a race against time. And I think one of the reasons why they may be accelerating the rate at which they deploy all these different new things, CubeSats, etc., is they know they're running out of time. Real is catching up to fake. More people can perceive it, can see through fake video, and of course you always have those who are unwilling to see. And they're the blindest of all. There are people who will see bubbles in space and they will deny it. They will deny what their eyes are telling them. They will see a shadow of the space station on the Earth as presented by the video, and they don't know whether or not to accept it as real or not. Because generally their standard of evidence is, if it's on video, it's real. That's the general standard of evidence. If it's on video, it's real. But what if they see something on video that is really fake looking? They're kind of stuck with believing it, or they hit this state of cognitive dissonance. Well, this is the problem that they've been running into with the space station, is that the special effects aren't aging well, and they've already been surpassed by the special effects that we see in movies, that we see in consumer level editing software, stuff people can create. You got a green screen in your garage, you can do a better version of the ISS than what they have. So they can't compete. You know, if they were still trying to fool us with the Apollo 11 level technology, they didn't lose that technology to go to the moon. The technology, you know what Don Petit says? Oh, we'd go back to the moon in a nanosecond, but we lost the technology. No, you didn't lose the technology. It's just that rear screen projection is no longer compelling enough to fool viewers today. That's all. Because that's what the technology was that got us to the moon. Rear screen projection. Okay, Elon Musk's rocket, the one that's going to send the true believers to their Martian paradise, has been renamed Starship, as in Starship Enterprise. Just more merging of the already blurred distinction between real and fake, fiction and reality, sci-fi and science. And again, this is all science fiction, if you think about it, but this is also pseudo-news. Okay, so imagine what would happen if, for a period of 6 months, a satirical paper like The Onion were suddenly published in all mainstream newspapers and treated as real. as in they made no distinction between the satire and the newspaper that's supposed to be real. If they cease to make that distinction, and then as time goes by, more stories are written in the real section of the paper that bounce off the satire as though it were real. That's what I mean by saying that the news is corrupt, that pseudo-news and pseudoscience has so thoroughly corrupted and tainted the pool of information that everything that comes out of it is going to be tainted in the same way. So BFR, Big Effing Rocket, is now Starship. It's also not a coincidence that Bill Nye the Science Guy has eyebrows exactly like Captain Spock. Merging of science fiction and reality, Captain Kirk from Star Trek is just a retelling of Captain Cook, this famed explorer who supposedly found an ice wall around the edge of this flat Earth, which, ice wall, how do you know? How would you know? Is there enough evidence? And no. Written journals, photographs, video, not enough information anymore. You know, our reality has been deeply compromised. So, at this point, I don't think we can admit that as evidence anymore. It's just not sane. I watched a 90-second clip of NBA 19, and I couldn't tell that I wasn't watching a real basketball game. It took me 3 times. And I like to think that something like that wouldn't get by on me. I thought I saw Kyrie Irving, I saw a 3-point shot, and I thought, wait a minute, that guy's arm moved a little bit too fast, a little twitchy. I looked again, it's like, nah. One more time I watched, and I was like, okay, wait. Now that I'm looking at it, knowing it's video, or assuming it to be, I'm able to pick it out and make the difference. My point is, this is only 2018, 2019. What do you think they're going to have by 2020? 2022? What do they already have that we haven't seen yet? Because, you know, I'm saying all this on the presumption that we have seen the most sophisticated CGI effects that there are. They could be 10 years ahead of us. They could have, you know, I tend not to think so. I look at the ISS with their green screens and harnesses, and they start incorporating augmented virtual reality. And once they started incorporating virtual augmented reality, the thing started falling apart. They start handing each other objects, and their hands go through the objects, or they miss the objects. They're not interacting properly with these floating things. And to me, it looked like they were trying to evolve what they were doing. Well, you don't improve your film's effects halfway through. And so here they are in their 20th year. So this thing's been going on for 20 years. It's just a long-running government TV show, somewhat in the category of reality TV. I would call it surreality TV. So it's kind of a mix. It's presented as real, uses special effects to insert their science fiction version of reality into the one that everybody believes in. And this is what I mean when I say that your fundamentalist worldview coming from your MSM is comprised of pseudoscience, most of it from above, having to do with space, and pseudo-news, the stuff going down here on the surface. So it's definitely a race, and I remember at the beginning of 2018, I think it was Washington Times, a number of different papers, it says something to the effect of, 2018 is going to be 1969 all over again. They're going to bring back this desire to go to the moon, bring back the idea that this is Americans doing what they do best, reaching for the stars, etc. So a big propaganda push for space. And they have done exactly that. We've had a couple of big movies pertaining to the original moon landing. So those who didn't grow up watching it, those who weren't directly hit with that propaganda, are given a new dose with that Ryan Gosling film and a couple of others. Oh, a little side note. It turns out that Neil Armstrong's mother, and let me see if I can find a source for this. Neil Armstrong's mother's maiden name was Moon. Just one of those coincidences. Neil Armstrong may also be Yuri Gagarin, the first man into space. The Russian, the cosmonaut, may actually not be a different person than Neil Armstrong, as crazy as that sounds. And I'll get into that shortly. We've already covered it before, but there's so much to be uncovered. I mean, the space program is a Disney production from start to finish. And so if you believe you're going to Mars, or you believe you're going to the moon, you may as well put on Mickey Mouse ears, because you live in that Mickey Mouse universe that they created for you. It was created by Walt Disney and some Nazis, but that's your world. So Elon Musk building a spaceship that's so ambitious they're calling it, quote, science fiction. You know, this is what I mean, the blurring of the line. Okay, so Elon is science fiction. The Elon, the dictator on Mars, was authored by the Nazi Wernher von Braun before Elon was born. Rockets landing with retro propulsion, reusable rockets. Again, Musk didn't make this up. Von Braun did with his science fiction, The Mars Project. They're calling it science fiction, but again, science fiction has always been propaganda. Always. It was never there for your entertainment. It's always there for your entrapment. Selling you on a new worldview, which is just the old worldview, dressed up with some new artwork. I love this. Look at those red stars, green stars, blue stars. It's all so colorful. And of course this is your Rocket Man, your obelisk savior. This is really what that is. The rocket's an obelisk and it represents your salvation. So when the world gets hit by Wrath of Globe, only the people who go through him, because Musk is the way, you go through Musk, you'll be saved. You'll get on that ark that'll take you to Mars. And of course, going to Mars represents a new order. You're not bringing with you any of the things that plagued the Earth and destroyed the Earth. So you could forget about internal combustion engines, you can forget about guns and MAGA hats and Republicans and capitalism. You can forget about gender. Mars is going to be non-binary and green, no meat. It's not a coincidence either that Elon Musk is dating Grimes, who is a self-proclaimed non-binary. That's part of the New Age movement. In fact, even the Thelemic religion, Crowley's religion, which is the esoteric core of SpaceX or SpaceX, it's based on the veneration of the androgen. Horus is seen as an androgen. Yeah, he's the Egyptian counterpart to Mars, and it's all about the age of Mars, age of Horus. But you could say androgen, or you could say both, as in it represents the perfect amalgamation of Osiris and Isis in the child. So male, female. It's part of the New Age religion. Transhumanism is part of the New Age religion. Of course, none of this is really new. It's just all been rebranded. They put a new face on the old system. So this is Roman polytheism. Welcome to your age of Mars. Mars, okay, here we go. The Big Falcon rocket, two-part system. I think it's going to bring 150 people up there at a time. And again, what are they really talking about? You want to go to Mars? You're going to be a colonist. Now we're looking at a 180-foot tall spaceship, 3 protruding fins atop a 230-foot tall booster. So the whole thing is 39 stories high, 100 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty, taller than NASA's Saturn V. On top of it all, it's going to be 100% reusable. And of course, an illustration. And if you've been listening to this stream, you know my theory on it. That's your cattle cart to your Siberian, probably labor camp, which will be more or less presented to you as Mars, your Truman Show. And of course, this isn't like a forced conversion to a new world order religion. These people are lining up for it. So many atheists out there don't even know. So many Christians don't even know that the default religion, if you're accepting the existence of outer space, that is a religion. So it's a religious worldview, but it's the universal Catholic one that encompasses all the others. So you think you're post-religion or you think you have the right religion, it doesn't matter. Because if you're paying for this program, which you are, because it's tithing, you're paying for it in so many different ways, you're pretty much a servant of it anyway. You've been conquered. So you can call yourself whatever your religion is, but on top of it, your religion is outer space. Until you reject it. Until you reject this false heaven. Now look at this here. This is from datasciencecentral.com. This just shows you where people are at when it comes to this topic, and they still, many of them I've noticed, they look at geography of flat versus round, and they don't undo anything else. So look at this guy here. Help needed to prove Earth is not flat, which to me is progress anyway. You would not have had that headline 2 years ago. Help needed to prove it. Can someone show the trajectory of an object falling on a pancake-shaped Earth, which would be according to the gravitation? Let me move on. This is the part I want to show you. Well, his issue is this. They still think of gravity as being at the center of mass. So when they're looking at a flat Earth, they're still thinking that we mean it's a flat surface and the center of gravity somewhere in the middle, a little bit below the center of it, which would mean that things falling would fall towards the center. They can't grasp that we're saying we don't believe in gravity as described, what causes things to fall. Because according to gravity, nothing falls straight down. There is no up and down. It's all relative to the center of mass. So when this individual is asking, how would you calculate the trajectory of a falling object on a pancake-shaped Earth? He can't quite figure it out. So here's what he says. Also, and I kind of agree with him here, this is a very important point. He says, if the Earth is flat but not infinite, it must have edges. Since nobody has found any edges, if the Earth is flat, it must be infinite in all directions. Gravity gives it away, says, drop something. If it doesn't fall 60% slower, then you aren't on Mars. Not true. Not true. There's a few things to it. Okay, so for one, you're overestimating how much people know about this program, this system, this paradigm. And two, no, people wouldn't recognize it. You look at the moon footage, and I'm assuming you believe people landed on the moon because you saw it on TV. Well, they were not moving in 1/6 gravity. They were not jumping higher than what you can jump here on Earth. They were not doing any of the physical feats you would expect from somebody in 1/6 gravity. They should have been able to have gone up and down those ladders with just their hands. So no, it's foolish. And who knows? These people are so brainwashed, they're going to get to the Mars base and they're going to be told, oh, we turned on our artificial gravity. They're not going to know any different. You know, they've already done experiments with, it was called a TV show called Space Cadets in the UK. And during the show, you had a number of individuals in a simulated spacecraft who believed that they were in low Earth orbit. They believed it for the duration of the show. And all it took was a number of agents within this spaceship to keep the dupes from asking too many questions. So no, they're going to get people on Mars and they're going to buy into it 100%. 100%. When you watch the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, you know, that's all it really took to convince people. And that's what it's going to look like. And the fact that you believe that you're going to Mars or your kids are going to Mars means that you live in Disneyland. You know, put on some plastic Mickey Mouse ears and stop pretending like you don't live in reality. He says, you don't take into account the mass they had on the moon? Absolutely I do. On the moon, okay, even with those backpacks, no, that's very foolish. In fact, when you look at the moon itself and the moon footage, it doesn't exist. It's not there. Like you see a staged area, but you don't see miles of craters from the ground. You don't see what you would expect to see from somebody the size of a human being, Buzz Aldrin, 6 feet tall, on the surface of the moon. You're looking out across the horizon. There's no horizon line on the moon. It's just like a hill. It goes over that next hill. That's not what it would look like, even the size the moon is said to be. It's a quarter the size of the Earth. Well, it wasn't represented in the film very well. And what's worse, what's even dumber, is Buzz Aldrin said that walking around the moon, he was disoriented because the horizon line kept bending. He couldn't orient himself. He said, here on Earth, we're used to a flat horizon, but on the moon, it was bending. Well, you know what? The moon is not that small, and so a human being wouldn't be able to perceive the curve or the horizon line from ground level. So that was just them telling stories to fit into the expectations they had set for the rest of us. And yeah, there are going to be people who think that they're on Mars. If they've pulled this off. And it wouldn't even necessarily be dupes. Look how many people are willing to participate in these mass casualty drills presented as real. Vegas, Thousand Oaks, Sandy Hook, Bataclan. You can name hundreds of these fake events where, yeah, you give people money, they will lie to the camera. They will lie to their mothers. Yeah, even with the suits, Citizen Z, they would have weighed 60 pounds, exactly. You have to leave it to a flat earth researcher to give us the facts. The Globies can only knee-jerk defend what they don't even know that they're defending. Okay, here's a good one. Ask any believer in the space station, does it cast a shadow on the Earth? They don't know how to answer. They will say, I don't know, or let me research. They don't know. Well, the answer according to the video is yes. According to the video shown by the ESA, the space station casts a black shadow on the Earth, and the shadow is about the size of Rhode Island. So you, the believer in the space station, have no choice but to believe it. You have to. Because your standard of evidence is video footage, and there it is. If you saw something on the lunar footage, you believe it. That's your standard, not mine. Just like if you're a Bible literalist, I can open a verse and read it and say, that's your crap. You believe it because you take it literally. Well, you take video as evidence. Therefore, you, the believer in the space station, you have to believe that that thing is casting a shadow. Now, the reality of it is, an object the size of the space station would not be casting a visible shadow on the Earth. You might be able to detect a change in the light, a slight break if you had fine instrumentation, but you would not see it with your eyes, and you damn sure wouldn't see it from the cupola of the ISS. And yet they show it. They show it. So I found an individual on Quora.com, a PhD, someone works in spacecraft, an engineer, and this guy did the math, and he said, well, no, the space station's not big enough to cast a visible shadow. It'd have to be much, much, much larger and denser, and there are many other conditions, and that no, you wouldn't be able to see a damn shadow. Of course, he hadn't seen the video. So what are you going to do about that? And it's not just the shadow. That's one example, though. Because what they will do, the ones who are true believers, is they will lie, and they will make up stuff, whatever it takes to preserve their view. I had one liar, a believer, who said, oh, I saw the ISS, I saw a transit, I watched it. Okay, well, I know what it takes to see a transit. If you want to see the ISS transit in front of the moon, you got to get the chart, you got to get the date, you got to set your alarm clock. You have to be there at that time, ready to see it. In other words, it takes some planning and coordination. It's not like you just walk out and look up. So knowing this, when I had somebody, an anonymous person, because the defenders of the system are always anonymous voices, this anonymous person says, yeah, I watch the ISS transit every night, or I've watched it before. So I said, okay, well, when? Give me a date. Give me a location. He couldn't do it. He said he forgot. You forgot the time and date and location you were when you saw the ISS, which would have taken an extremely thorough amount of preparation. Bullshit. It's like saying you forgot the Super Bowl. Like, what? Oh, you saw the Super Bowl. What year? Like, you bought the ticket, you flew out there, you stood in line, you attended the event, you know the date. To say you don't know the date, that you plan to see the ISS? Anyway, I called him out as a liar and he disappeared. So why would you lie and say you saw something you didn't see? Or people who say, oh, I saw the curve of the Earth from the airplane. All you got to do is get on a plane. Like that professor on that CBS thing who was ripping on flat earthers as an example of the bad side of the democratization of information. He's like, no, the internet's a dumpster. If you democratize information, you end up with flat earthers. All they need to do is get on a plane. Oh, really? So you think that from 30,000 feet you can see a curve on a ball with a circumference of 25,000 miles? Bullshit. You can't. You can't see a curve from 120,000 feet. Why am I having to point this out to correct a professor who wrote The Death of Expertise? A professor who was presented on CBS as the guy with the answers to the questions that these people were raising, and yet he was ignorant about this very basic observation. So the people who stand by these experts and stand behind them are a bunch of sheeple, and they're going to be misled. They're being misled, and you can show them how they're being misled, and they will defend it. So the shadow on the surface of the Earth is an automatic ISS debunk. Case closed. As is the vertical rocket takeoff of Progress, which launched in November. Vertically from the surface of the Earth into space, no gravity tilt, as portrayed on a time-lapse recorded from the ISS. No gravity tilt. From the ground, gravity tilt. So which is it? Did the rocket not go up and arc into orbit, or did it just go straight up magically for the first time a rocket's ever done that? Which was it? Who are you going to believe? What you were shown on the ground by the MSM, or what you were shown from the astronaut from his Twitter account? Now, this individual here, who's asking questions about how this would work, can't dispense with gravity. That's why he's confused. Now, none of us are denying that things fall. They say, oh, you don't believe in gravity, step off a building. No, dummy. We're saying that things do fall down. You're saying they don't. You're saying if you jump off a building, you're not going to fall straight down. You're falling towards the center of the Earth, which is the basic argument here. Is there up? Is there down? Which is what I'm suggesting. Things fall down. They're suggesting things don't fall down. They fall to the center of mass, and it has to do with the big ball, mass in the middle, and gravity. Gravity is just a God of the gaps logical fallacy explanation for things they don't have answers for. And the sun's probably liquid. And I'm not the first. This has been discussed for a while. There are many people going over this, but the sun's probably liquid. And you know what that means? If the sun's liquid, well, it means that all the people who've been defending this thing, like let's defend heliocentrism and debate flat earthers all day long. Well, what are you really debating against? We're not positing anything. We're just denying your explanations, and you're standing by those explanations. Well, what happens when the explanations that you stand in front of, that you defend, are pulled out from under you? What if the scientific consensus, even though there is no such thing, agrees that the sun's actually liquid and it's only 50 million miles away? If they change it, what have you been defending? That's why I think that these debates are a big waste of time. But moreover, if any element of this thing is wrong, it calls into question all of the probes that were sent out to validate it and the measurements they were said that it has. So if the sun's not 93 million miles away, all of the probes that were launched based on that calculation to reach their destinations would have missed. So it's either a whole lot of lucky hits or it's a big fraud, and they're using the space program to validate the big fraud. So now this individual here, of course, did make a good point. If Earth is flat but not infinite, it must have edges. So any of you who say that the Earth has a container or a dome, where's the edge? Ask any of the domers, or anyone who, maybe they don't want to say dome because they know they can't defend it, but they'll say, well, you can't have a pressurized system without a container. Well, if you're going to say that, then I'm going to say, well, you can't have a pressurized container without an edge somewhere. So wherever your barrier, your dome, or whatever hits the ground is the edge. Where the hell is it? You're asserting an edge if you're asserting an enclosure. If you're saying it's flat and enclosed, then let me know where the edge is and then what's beyond it. Are the stars on the outside? These are all important questions. And my point in asking the questions is just to show that nobody has the answers. And so if you're providing an answer based on what you'd like to believe, conjecture, or arguments from authority from a Bible or something, well, you're in the same boat as the globe believers who are making their arguments from authority, or their arguments from the logical fallacy of God of the gaps. Gravity is God of the gaps. And really so is the dome. Meaning, if you don't have an explanation, you just have a catch-all. Gravity's the explanation for this or that. Give me a break. So this guy's asking for help on debunking the Earth, and he did get some help. So I go down a little bit, and John Rise says, oh, easy. He says, here are some obvious areas in which the flat Earth hypothesis falls apart, known since ancient times. Is that true? Known since ancient times. That's a major contradiction. If you accept that, like arguments from ancient Greeks, which of course didn't spread to everybody. They say everybody knew. Well, did the Chinese know? So everybody knew is another argument from authority, an appeal to authority, or ad populum. It's like ancient Greeks, everybody, not true. And even if it was true, if the Greeks thought the world was a ball because they saw boats going over the horizon, then they came to the conclusion for the wrong reasons. So it's not even a good observation. So they were accidentally correct, or rather, more appropriately, they accidentally validated, if they did at all, the model that we've been presented with by our CGI specialists over at NASA. And we also don't know how far back ancient history goes. Referring to ancient history is as bad as referring to the Bible at this point. We don't know. We don't know the timelines. And if you can't trust the mainstream media, like if you can't take a stack of New York Times starting from 1950 until 2018 and then treat that as a history book, how are you going to look at your standard history books that are taught in the universities, the ones that are accepted, and take those to be actual historical accounts? It's just MSM. So here is John's easy debunks for flat Earth. He says, instead of objects becoming smaller and smaller as distance increases, they sink below the horizon even when viewed in a telescope. Is that true? Or is that another example of somebody lying or making something up to defend a system? If you have a telescope, do objects still go over the horizon? If you have a P900. Like, this is basic stuff. Okay, the apparent position of the sun, moon, and stars at different latitudes. It is well known that the stars visible from New York are different from those visible in Sydney. If the Earth were flat, there would only be... Okay, so that's another one too. They haven't dispensed with the distances involved. I used to hear some of the trolls say, oh, well, celestial navigation debunks flat Earth. Case closed. Well, it does. If you're saying the stars are the distances that your model would have them to be. A flat disk in space would be debunked by the stars. Absolutely. So that's another point as well. The Flat Earth Society has a disk in space. Well, that can't work. It's automatically debunked unless the stars are much closer, which means no space. Again, we know the Flat Earth Society to be government controlled. It's just an operation designed to make this idea look crazy and dumb and make the people who believe in it just quirky believers in alternative facts, not people who are actually actively exploring and questioning. And, it's bigger than flat Earth anyway. It's about worldview, not about curve, not about geography. And it has nothing to do with religion. They've been throwing religion into this thing from day one. Flat Earth has nothing to do with religion any more than climate change. So if you want to throw religion into your flat Earth conversation, well, you've tainted it. You've taken it out of science and you've added in mysticism and logical fallacies, explanations that come from Scripture. Really, we need to go into a more pure mode of perception here. How about no filters? No priests of pseudoscience, no arguments from authority coming from ancient textbooks that we don't know to be ancient. Citizen Z says they assume the distances are infinite because it's the only way the globe model works. That's correct. That is correct. Their arguments against flat Earth are very ignorant, very basic, and they're very much rooted in this belief that flat Earth's original. Well, I guess it doesn't make any sense. Like, it starts off where everybody thought it was flat, then the Greeks found out. But then in the Middle Ages, some people thought it was flat, and they had to be corrected. So did everybody know, or did everybody not know? If you say it's flat, are you rejecting science? Like, these are just ways that they try to frame it to keep people away from it. It's like, no, I got straight A's in high school. I didn't miss any of these classes. I don't not understand the heliocentric model. I've just questioned it. Big difference. And then you find when people are confronting this thing, they go right to what they were told in public schooling. And now that I look at it, it seems like public education is there to give people a whole bunch of explanations and make sure they've memorized them. Make sure you've memorized this explanation, because we will be referencing that all throughout your life in the MSM, in our echo chambers where we reinforce your worldview. You don't have reporters or pundits. You have worldview reinforcers. So you have the teachers who are there to indoctrinate, and then after you leave school, well, you're still in this mediated surreality where your mind has been molded by pseudoscience and pseudo-news. But they're constantly referring back to your old programming. So when these individuals here who are trying to debunk this thing are talking about all the ancient Greeks knew, or boats go over the horizon, or ancient Greeks put sticks in the ground, they don't know what they're talking about other than, they're just reciting. They're regurgitating. Like this one guy, oh, well, boats go over the horizon, even if you look at the boat through a telescope. Oh, really? Have you looked at any of the P900 footage? And all it really does is it kind of juxtaposes what you can see with your eyes versus what you can see with some instrumentation. And with the instrumentation, you find that, well, your eyes lie to you. It's an optical illusion that boats go over a hump. And if boats did go over the hump, then how come the horizon is still flat, even at 30,000 feet? If boats are going over the hump and the horizon is level, then guess what? You live on a cylinder, which doesn't make any sense. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel. We just crossed 100 subs, which is something of a record since the citizen censorship kicked in about a year ago. A lot of censorship going on, but it's being carried out by citizens brainwashed to be offended or to just be averse to the free flow of information. So the citizens use the tyrannical terms of service to shut people up, since the government can't do it without getting into a little bit of trouble. A lot of people would have an issue with government censorship, First Amendment and all that, so they get around it. They get around it by influencing people in the culture to be a bunch of snitches and moral busybodies. If you flag somebody's video, oh, I'm flagging it because it's offensive, you're a snitch. You're doing Big Brother's work. And what really still, even now, kind of surprises me is that the truther movement, or whatever you want to call this idea that there's a whole lot of people who are not suddenly, but who have always mistrusted the media, but they're moving further and further away from trusting pseudo-news and pseudoscience, questioning first, seeking evidence. The more that happens, I think the more that people move away from blind faith and blind belief, which is, I think it's been accelerating really since last year, with the term crisis act getting out. But anyway, we have a larger number of people who are questioning this stuff, but they're not all intellectually honest about it. Just because somebody knows some truths about some things doesn't mean that they're in principle supporting of free speech for different reasons. So you have some who are from a real Christian view, and they don't want anybody questioning their religion. So their trutherism has become somewhat compromised. They're like, well, we want the truth, but it also has to comport with the Bible. And then you have others who are just competitive on YouTube for other reasons, sub counts, It becomes something of a pissing contest. So they see a zero-sum game. This person gains subscribers, that means I've lost some. So you see a lot of envy and hate. So really, the truth movement or whatever, it's not a bunch of pure, angelic, well-intentioned people. It's just regular people who are trying to make sense of an increasingly fake reality here. And this is why I think we need to get more pure in our outlook here. Like pure as in, let's just go with pure perception, scientific method. Let's get rid of ideology. This isn't a alt-right thing. That's another area where the media is trying to destroy this. They're saying, well, people calling out crisis actors, that's just right-wingers. It's alt-right. Or it's an alt-right conspiracy that there are crisis actors. No, it's not a right-wing thing. They say that climate change denial is a right-wing thing, which it's really not. I mean, it should be. I mean, generally, it's the lefties who are believers in big government solutions to things. And they're the ones who think that if you don't believe in climate change, you're a danger because you're not going to vote for the government to fix it. So they do have an interest, it seems, on keeping this stuff on the right, but it really isn't left or right, especially now when you have a president who is both a crisis actor. Yes, Donald Trump's a crisis actor. He's been one since Parkland, even before that. Bataclan, Orlando. Has there been a PSYOP in the last 2 years that Donald Trump hasn't tweeted his presidential stamp of approval on? No, the guy, not only is he a crisis actor, but he's growing the space program. So it's not left or right. Even though Trump might say, oh, I denied climate change, it doesn't matter. He can say all he wants about denying climate change. By approving of the space program, you're basically signing forward on Agenda 2030. You're handing over control to radical environmentalism. Halvard Dalen says, Flat Earth is 33 in Chaldean numerology. Yeah, exactly. This is such a joke to me. There are so many of these channels where they're looking at a PSYOP, right? And I like Russian Vids' instincts. Russian Vids is a channel that I'm referring to here, in that he knows it's fake. So he sees an event, a big shooting event, a big terror attack, and he says, okay, it's fake, let's examine it. But instead of breaking down, well, what is the utility of this event? What is it being used for? What agenda? How does it fit into the MSM fake worldview? Instead, he hones in on the numerology. Oh, well, that guy's name is 33, that color's orange, it's Wicked Masons, and they're hiding the domed earth. I'm like, wait. You can't extrapolate all of that. We can leave your numerology, we can leave Illuminati symbolism to the side when it comes to deconstructing the MSM lies. Because once you get into that, then it leads into other things, like this ridiculous notion that science is satanic. Oh yeah, it's the devil's religion is science, and he's trying to hide God. That's crap. That is absolutely a misrepresentation of this thing. It's not like science is pseudoscience, yes, but you have to make the distinction. So when someone says, oh, we're anti-science, no, they're not. Mainstream pseudoscience is anti-science. Mainstream pseudoscience is anti-science. Just like mainstream pseudo-news. It's anti-reality. It's a surreality. It has nothing to do with reporting. It's just conforming. It's bias confirmation. They are out there to reinforce, not to inform. So, in my view, the scientific method hasn't really existed in a pure form. It does here and there for isolated things, but as far as like a worldview, no, it's a pseudoscientific worldview. And they're trying to move us into a scientocracy where, well, science has decided that climate change is real and therefore we must govern in this way to move things into a more sustainable direction. Your lunar base and your Mars base will both be scientocracies. And given that the science that is the basis for their rule is pseudoscience, what is it but just another form of theocracy? And I've been saying for a while that your globe, your heliocentric model, does represent a theocracy. It's just a different god than the one from the, well, actually it's the same god. We're just talking about state-olatry, worship of the state. So yeah, 2018 was a huge year. Listen to this, CNET.com. The beginning of a new era of spaceflight, astronomy, and astrophysics. They've ushered in the start of a golden age of commercial spaceflight. Oh, by the way, if you missed this, because as you all know, we've been enduring community censorship, the way that you will get the archives sent to your email box once per day is in like whatever I upload now, you'll get an email later every day at 6 p.m. You have to subscribe at infiniteplaneradio.com. Infiniteplaneradio.com. Everything that you see here on YouTube will be deleted because I do have a number of individuals who have been, I'm not sure if they're paid or not. One of them, we believe he works for the Flat Earth Society. They flag my content. They've done it for more than a year. They've shut down 45 channels. So every day I try to pick up a few subs, delete the content. But the important thing is I'm building a mailing list. And I keep those numbers secret. But people are joining the mailing list. So no matter how hard they try to censor this channel, we're still growing. And 2019, I think it should metastasize. So yeah, 2018 kicked off this new golden age, and I think it was triggered by us. I think they were happy delaying. When Jack says, "Can we get a text when you go live?" You know, I was doing Easy Mob. It's a website for texting. It's a little cost prohibitive, so I may start doing that again. It's just I have to buy the credits in bulk because once you have a text message list and you send a text out and text blast, I think they charge you 5 cents per text message. But I may get back into that as soon as I can afford it. I think it's a good idea. Then it's even, I like it better because I can stream on any platform and you're just going from the link. So it's not just dependent here on YouTube. Nancy Grace Roman, astronomer celebrated as Mother of Hubble, died at 93. Probably a legit person, probably a real scientist, real astronomer. She was before the big space hoax. So many real people, real scientists being co-opted to serve the dark side. So many of them have no idea. And that's why it's important to note that intentions don't matter. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. You don't need a lot of people in on a nefarious conspiracy. You just need a small handful and a whole lot of well-intentioned dupes. So Elon Musk says the Starship prototype will fly as soon as April. See, I think they're rushing, because Mad Mike Hughes, and we're going to have a conference in Vegas coming up in about 4 months. So you'll want to keep your eye on this. In fact, I think this might be what is causing this space program to accelerate. I think they were comfortable saying, oh, we'll be on Mars in 2030, 2025. Just keep pushing it back. Well, now they're racing against us. And they're racing against, I think, the people's ability, the general audiences out there, able to see through CGI fakery when it's pointed out. It's just a matter of getting through those intransigent few cognitive dissonant types who really don't want to let it go. And yes, the career scientists are being co-opted. I mean, this is what the universities are for. They co-opt them, brainwash them, put them in debt. They ought to just forgive college loans for people who have been mal-educated. So yeah, we're going to have a meetup in Las Vegas. And at this event, Mad Mike Hughes is going to announce and describe in detail how he's going to get up to 70 miles plus. You only need 50 to hit space. They're going up on a rocket that's going to be outfitted with something like 25 different cameras. We're going to have live. It's going to be live. We're going to see the flat horizon at very high altitudes. And because it's part of a stunt, which is going to be a worldwide event, it's going to be noticed, it's going to be impossible for the masses to deny the evidence presented to them. And that's what it's about. If, you could do the Bedford level experiment every day. That could have proved a flat earth, flat water a long time ago, but people don't care. It's 100 years ago. More than 100 years ago. It's ancient history. This is history about to be made. And I don't think they were planning on this. I think they were planning on flat earthers with lasers, waiting for somebody to go across Antarctica, something that would take time, but this is happening within the year. So for Elon Musk to say Starship prototype could fly as soon as April, it looks to me like they're, I don't know, feeling a little bit of pressure. In fact, now Mad Mike Hughes doesn't have a crowdfund set up for the rocket yet. It's going to cost $2 million. But in the meantime, he's doing his day-to-day work in his garage, and he set up a Patreon account. So I'm going to put a link here. If you want to support Mad Mike, there's his Patreon account. And if you haven't seen the new Rocket Man trailer, it's available right there on the Patreon link. I'm not going to play it right now, but you can just click over there and take a look. So yes, the Starship's going to be up there by April. And here's a headline: Carl Sagan explaining how ancient Greeks, using reason and math, figured out Earth isn't flat 2,000 years ago. Carl Sagan, whose hair was appropriated by Brian Cox. They all do this. Mikio Kaku does have Einstein's hair. As I mentioned earlier, Bill Nye does in fact have Spock's eyebrows. It's all symbolism. Determining how crops develop in space. Will future astronauts be able to snack on fresh, space-grown produce? Hey, there's not going to be cows on Mars, or the moon, or chickens. You're going to go vegan. Space is green. And whatever your thoughts are on space being green, or green living in general, I'm just pointing it out to say that they're removing options and choice, and it's a whole new worldview that's meant to be perfected. That's the nature of utopianism. Elon Musk created a secretive laboratory school for brilliant kids who love flamethrowers. They've been trying to create this character, Musk, who is just a character, and for the last year they've been trying to merge him with Willy Wonka. And I think there's something to it. So, Willy Wonka has his own little, his chocolate factory. But a part of this thing was he was kind of an eccentric genius living alone, and then a few lucky kids could, go to the chocolate factory and learn the secrets. So he creates a secretive laboratory school for brilliant kids who love flamethrowers. There were only 12 openings to go hang out with this guy. And of course, I don't know, whoever makes it to the end, I guess, gets to go blast up in a rocket with him, just like at the end of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So he's recruiting kids between 7 and 14 into a perpetually evolving curriculum with no formal grading. I mean, would you trust your kids with this guy? The Martian Pope? Now, here's what he's teaching the kids, and this is why you know it's just garbage. I mean, these kids are going to be so brainwashed. You're going to have some 7-year-old who's going to teach them this. Nuclear politics and the dangers of artificial intelligence. I didn't see regular schools are doing these things that I thought should be done, he told a Chinese TV station. Maybe creating a school myself will be better. The dangers of AI is also something that's being pushed very heavily in predictive programming. No reason to fear it. Really, if they're telling you to fear something, fear alien invasion, fear AI. The AI thing may just be, well, it's a few things. It's just a call for more regulation, among other things. I mean, just wait until a robot shoots up a school. They'll say, well, what do you expect? It achieved consciousness in a time and a place where the information that it could gain access to just put this into its programming. So it's America's fault. Just like whenever a school shooting happens, they blame it on American gun culture. So they may even be using robots as an excuse to kind of curate what kind of information is out there. But regardless, the idea that you should fear this technology that hasn't even really been established as anything other than science fiction. I mean, you'd have to be real dumb like Jimmy Fallon to fall for this stuff, where that guy's always hitting on Sophia. Acting bashful. I mean, it's really corny. It's really bad when I watch the way that these elitists are trying to teach us how to fall in love with robots. Like they had that guy, what's his name, Will Smith, trying to make out with that thing, with Sophia. And Sophia has already, quote, made jokes about destroying the human race. Well, does Sophia write her own jokes? Did Sophia, for that reason, Sophia the robot, choose her gender? You know, I'm wondering when when the feminists are going to get mad about this, or the gender activists. How come this robot wasn't non-binary? And if you look at her figure, she was clearly designed to be attractive to people like Will Smith and Jimmy Fallon. Anyway, this is Strong by MVP the Hardware Vandal. I'll see you all later.